Hi, welcome to the next in our series of studies in John's Gospel. We've come to the last part of John chapter 1 after quite a while, and shortly we'll go into John chapter 2. Now, those of you who know me well will recognise the shirt that I'm wearing, or perhaps you'll be able to guess at the shirt I'm wearing. Those of you who don't know me well will be pondering, why is he wearing that shirt? If you know me well, you know it's a Cambridge United shirt. Hopefully, if you know me, you kind of accept my peculiarities of my love and passion for football, and particularly for Cambridge United, who, let's face it, are not very good. When you know something about somebody, it doesn't necessarily mean you reject them, but it does mean that you have a fuller picture. There are lots of things about me that you don't know, and I kind of manage that a bit. I'm not a very public person, I'm a very private person. But there are some things that I allow everyone to know, and one of them is Cambridge United. We're going to think in this session a little bit about how Jesus knows us and what that means for us. The story that we have come to so far is John the disciple, who's telling us about John the Baptist, who had some disciples, who had his own followers. And two of those are then reassigned to Jesus. John the Baptist has told them that Jesus is the one he was preparing the way for. Jesus is the one they need to follow. And so Andrew, one of the followers of John the Baptist, decides then to follow Jesus. And the first thing he does is to go and tell his brother Simon. And he brings Simon to Jesus. And we looked at this in our last talk, because Jesus renames Simon. He calls him Rock. Or the Greek word for rock is Petros, or Peter as we would know it. Let's pick it up from there. John 1:43. The next day Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." So he finds another person to become one of his disciples, Philip. And wants just to explore the glory and the wonder of Jesus finding people. He looked for Philip. He wanted Philip. There's a sense in this word find, which is going to appear a few times in the next couple of verses, that there's a purposeness to it. There's something intentional. Jesus wants Philip. He looks for Philip. He needs and desires Philip to follow him. And the relationship is initiated by Jesus. And this ties in with what we later come to understand and know about Jesus, that one of the key missions of Jesus is to seek and to save the lost. He's coming and looking for people who need him. I'm going to ask a number of questions for us to reflect on. There's quite a lot in this session, so it may be that you want to press pause at each point and maybe with pen and paper reflect on each question. The first question is this: are we willing to be found by Jesus? He's seeking us. Maybe we have been found, but each day there needs to be a renewal of that commitment, a renewal of that invitation into his life. Yes, Lord, I need you. Yes, Lord, come in. And so when we receive Jesus and we allow him to find us, we accept that we need him and we open our heart to him. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." What was following Jesus? What was that, and what did that involve? We looked at it a little bit earlier with being a disciple of John, but just to recap, a disciple, and it was a common practice for teachers to have a few people who would follow them around. They would spend lots of time with them. So when Jesus says to Philip, "Follow me," he's saying, I want you to come and devote priority time, lots of your time, possibly full time, but at least significant parts of the week, to being with me and to listening and learning from Jesus. Someone who was to follow him was not just going to go where he goes, but was to also take a lot of attention to what he was saying, to ask him questions, to learn what he was teaching. And to move on from that was to copy and obey him. And so for a follower of a disciple of Jesus, they were the people who were to go where he was going, to the people he was going to the situations he was going into. They would be alongside him and they would do what he does. They would learn from him and copy him and follow him and do what he says. And so that leads us to our second question. Are we willing to follow him? And where are we willing to follow him to? Where will he take us? Perhaps in this season to difficult places, places of risk. Are we willing to go there? Perhaps to places where there is rejection or difficult characters to deal with. Perhaps to places of poverty and sadness, of suffering and anguish. And when we go to the places he wants to take us, are we willing to copy him in those places and to do what he says and what he wants? Verse 44 tells us that Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Now, a little bit of a map here. If you're a fan of maps, good. If not, just helps us understand a couple of things. Here is a map of the Roman provinces at that time, of which now make up what we call Israel. Judea and Galilee and so on and so forth. And he's been with John the Baptist, who is baptizing by the River Jordan. But we're going to move north and look at the part that he's particularly in around Galilee. And there are three places to note. The first is Bethsaida, where it's said that Andrew and Simon Peter come from. You'll see that's at the north of Galilee, on the coast probably, and a fishing port and a place where fishermen would live. The Bethany, where John the Baptist has been baptizing people, is a little unclear because it's not the Bethany near Jerusalem, and most scholars reckon it's this place down here that was probably quite a small place, but we know it was on the River Jordan because John the Baptist was baptizing in the River Jordan. And you'll see that Nazareth, where Jesus has been living, remember he was born in Bethlehem, but that wasn't where Joseph and Mary were from. They were from Nazareth. They'd gone down to Bethlehem for the census. So he'd been brought up in Nazareth. And I want to just notice the relationship between these three places. Approximately, there is around about these kind of distances, 25 miles between Bethsaida and Nazareth as the crow flies, probably longer by road, 30 miles from Bethsaida to what is probably Bethany, and 20 miles between Bethany and Nazareth. Now that may not seem far with a car, but it's a bit of a journey on foot. You know, it's a day and a half's walk, but not unfamiliar. So Philip, we read, then found Nathanael and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Now, Nathanael's an interesting character. We don't hear about him again. We'll find out that he's going to follow Jesus. Whether he's one of the 12 or not is uncertain. If he is the 12, then he's probably the guy called Bartholomew in other lists. It's quite common for people to have different names, as we know. Or maybe he doesn't actually become one of the 12 and he's just another follower of Jesus. But anyway, let's note that Philip has found him, that Philip seeks him out. Having been found by Jesus, Philip's response is to seek that others will find him too. His response to knowing Jesus is to tell us, similar to Andrew's. Andrew's response was to get his brother. Philip's response is to find Nathanael. We don't know if he's a relative, probably a friend, a colleague, something like that, a neighbour. But what we do discover is the impact of following Jesus for Philip is not private. It changes how he responds to other people. He wants to tell other people about him. And he knows already what he feels. He's able to say that this is the one that Moses has described. And he's able to say that he knows something about Jesus. And I want to ask us, and just briefly again, what it is that we are able to say we know about Jesus. And this was very much one of the talks a few sessions ago when we looked at why Andrew told his brother Simon. And we looked at the first thing. That was the title of that session, that talk. And in that, I talked about a number of different things that we might want to reflect on, that we were able to say with integrity, yes, this is my experience of Jesus. And I want to commend that talk to you. If you haven't looked at it, please go back and find it. So the question for us to respond to just now is, can we describe who Jesus is? Who he is to us? Are we able to say to others, this is what Jesus means. This is what Jesus has done. He is the one who has brought me hope. He is the one who has given me peace. He is the one who has given me meaning. He is the one who has given me direction. He is the one who has taken away my fear of the future. He is the one who has healed my past. Are we able to describe who Jesus is to us? So Philip describes to Nathanael who he thinks Jesus is and who he's found Jesus to be. And Nathanael replies, Nazareth, remember how far that was on that little triangle? Nazareth, can anything good come from there? So he has a scorn for Nazareth. Now, that's not that, it may be that he just didn't like people from a different town, maybe like a kind of football loyalty, the people of Liverpool and the people of Manchester, I don't know, Newcastle and Sunderland, but probably it was more likely because he understood that the Messiah was to come from Bethlehem. That's where the scriptures foretold the Messiah would come from, not from Nazareth. Nazareth was a nothing place. Nazareth was not a place that Nathanael respected. And we see again how Jesus moves from the rejection and the isolation and the ordinariness of a manger, of a trough amongst animals, to being brought up in a village that is not respected and is ridiculed. And once again we discover a Jesus who takes the outsider's route, who comes from amongst those who are looked down upon, who identifies with the outsider. And Jesus surprises people because he's not part of the power elite. He comes from the ordinary places and he mixes with the ordinary people. And he calls and finds the ordinary people like you and me. Now, Philip doesn't have any answer for this question, for this statement, other than come and see. And we talked about it in that talk, the first thing, that we don't have to have all the answers. We don't argue. We don't persuade people. We just say, come and see what we've experienced. Come and see what we know. Come and see what we've found. And that's why it's important to be able to know what we know. Not to worry about fancy arguments, but just to say, come and see. Come and watch this video. Come and watch this live stream. Come to my church. Come and meet the people who will bring Jesus more alive into your life. And we learn from the way Jesus handles Nathanael, because we're going to see what Jesus says in a moment, that Nathanael's doubt and questioning is okay. He's not rebuked. He's allowed to ask the question. He's allowed to say, look, he can't come from Nazareth. But what he does need is to go with Philip and investigate. And we may have questions, and we may have places or people we're suspicious of. But what's important is to investigate. So who are we suspicious? And what do we doubt? What are the questions that we have? What is it that we say of God? You can't be doing that. You can't be using them. You can't be doing these things. And where is it that Jesus says, come and see, come and watch, come and look? When Jesus, this is John 1:47, when Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said of him, here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. This is quite an interesting phrase, and it seems to be a little bit of a wordplay. The Israelites were named after Israel. Israel was the name re-given to Jacob. You remember that Jesus has given Simon a new name. Well, God gave Jacob a new name. Jacob deceived his brother. Jacob cheated his father out of the birthright, and he runs away in fear, and he wrestles with God. And in the wrestling with God, he comes back to God. And so he's called Israel in Genesis 32:28, which means the one who struggled with God. But the point is that Jacob was known and perceived as the one who deceived. And so when Jesus says he is an Israelite in whom there's no deceit, there's a little bit of a known wordplay going on. He's a follower of Israel who loses his deceit by becoming Israel instead of Jacob. Why is this here? Well, lots of people question now, why is this? It seems an odd little story and an odd little statement, but I think there's a real important significance here, because what we're discovering is that Jesus really, really values integrity. That honesty is really important, and he's signaling that out and highlighting that. And John, in telling us about this story, is highlighting it, that Jesus wants integrity. He wants honesty. There is a fable, a story from the 19th century. Truth and lie meet one day. And lie says to truth, "It's a marvellous day today." The truth looks up to the skies and sighs, for the day was really beautiful, and lie was telling the truth. And lie and truth spent the day together. Ultimately, they arrived beside a well. And the lie tells the truth. "The water is very nice. Let's take a bath and bathe and swim together." And the truth, once again, suspicious, tests the water and discovers that it is indeed very nice. And they undress and start to bathe in the well. Suddenly, the lie jumps out of the water, puts on the clothes of the truth and runs away. The furious truth comes out of the well and runs everywhere to find the lie and get her clothes back. But the world, seeing the truth naked, turns its gaze away with contempt and rage. And the poor truth returns to the well and disappears forever, hiding within its shame. And ever since then, the lie has travelled around the world, dressed as the truth, satisfying the needs of the society, because the world, in any case, does not want to meet the naked truth. Jesus values honesty and integrity, and sometimes the world doesn't want the naked truth. What does it mean for us not to have deceit within us? What does it mean for us to live in truth? It means not saying what others want to hear. It means saying what we believe to be true, not what we think will bring acceptance from others. It means being honest in what we think and feel, perhaps about faith, perhaps about justice, perhaps about compassion, perhaps about our own mistakes. It's about being honest and not saying what will bring ease or comfort. Living without deceit means not saying different things to different people, not playing people off, not having one persona on one social media outlet or in one conversation that is different to another because we want to please everyone. And living without deceit means not cheating or manipulating people, not trying to win them to do what we want by all means possible. It means that we live with integrity, that we will say the truth even if it doesn't persuade people. We won't use untruth for our end. The means does not justify the end. And in our culture, in our society, in our world today, we need this more than ever. There are so many people who can convinced that what they believe is right. They are so convinced that what they want is the right thing that they see no problem in lying in order to get others to believe what they believe. They are convinced that truth it can be distorted in service of the greater good, and they're wrong. You cannot use deceit for what is perceived or allegedly a greater good. The truth has to be priority. There's a Russian proverb that says you can get to the ends of the earth by lying, but you'll never get back. We need to be people of truth and honesty, not only with others, but with ourselves. And one of the greatest sadnesses, I think, in life is encountering people who have lied to themselves. They have persuaded themselves of a series of a perception of history or a perception of reality That means that they now are convinced of something that isn't true, that at the beginning they knew wasn't true, but for various reasons, perhaps to save face, perhaps because it made them feel more comfortable, they needed to believe something. And they've rewritten their own history, and they've rewritten the history of those they've encountered. Michael Lunig, a great cartoonist, says this in one of his cartoon books. In order to be truthful, we must do more than speak the truth. We must also hear the truth. We must also receive the truth. We must also act upon the truth. We must also search for truth, the difficult truth, within us and around us. We must devote ourselves to truth. Otherwise we are dishonest and our lives are mistaken. And he concludes, God grant us the strength and the courage to be truthful. Amen. Have we eliminated deceit in us? And Nathanael asked Jesus in verse 48, how do you know me? And Jesus answered, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you. Jesus is able to say to Nathanael, I saw you before you've come to me. Jesus knows Nathanael. He wasn't there when Philip told him to come and find Jesus. He wasn't there when Philip told Nathanael that he had found the Messiah. But he saw it. And he's able to tell Nathanael that this is what he saw. And Jesus knows his strengths and his weaknesses. He knows that he's a person who's honest. He says what he thinks. Can any good come out of Nazareth? And he's a person who's honest, who says, yeah, I'll come and find out. There's no deceit in him. He says what he thinks, but he's willing to explore. He's not closed. And so Jesus says, I know who you are. I know that you are willing to explore, and I know that you had your doubts. And it's okay, and it's good, and you're honest. And Jesus knows us. He knows our hopes and our fears. He knows the things that we're looking forward to and that we long for, and he knows the things that we fear and the things that have scarred us and the things that have damaged us. He knows our questions and our hopes. He knows what we don't understand. He knows what our questions and our doubts. He knows what we don't understand. He knows what we don't believe. He knows what we struggle to hold on to. He knows what worries us. He knows our hurts and our sins. He knows how we've been hurt and sinned against and damaged, and the scars that we carry. And he also knows the sins that we've committed and the way in which we've hurt and damaged other people, and the way in which we've passed on some of the things that were done to us, and the way in which through deliberate action, or sometimes careless thought, or sometimes through neglect, or sometimes through laziness, we have contributed to the pain and sin in our world. He knows it all. And he knows our strengths and our weaknesses. He knows what we're good at, what we're gifted at, and what we've called to be. And he knows what we're not so good at, and what we struggle with, and what we're not going to be able to manage. He knows what we love, what makes us alive, and what gives us a refreshment and restores us and rebuilds us. And he knows what we hate. He knows what we don't want to do, and what drives us mad, and what we can't bear to keep doing. And in all of this, he knows our potential. He knows how he wants to use us, and he knows our opportunities. He knows the plans and purposes and things that he's got in store that he would love us to choose to follow him and do. The things laid out and marked out for us and prepared in advance for us, that he just says, choose my way and do what I've made you to do. And as we looked at in our last session in John, he knows who he's called us to be, the name that he's given us. And he wants us to do it. He knows all of this. He knows what we think we can't do, but he knows what we can do. He knows how we think we've messed up, but he knows how we can be forgiven. He knows how we can be cleansed. He knows how we feel useless, but he knows how much value he's put in us. He knows what we think is impossible, and he knows is achievable. He knows what we can't do, but what, filled with his Spirit and empowered by his strength, we can do. He knows it all. So how does it change us to be known by Jesus? How does it change us to be known by Jesus? And Daniel declared, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Kings, the King of Israel. He's become convinced that something good can come out of Nazareth. He's changed his mind. That's why Jesus calls him the one who has no deceit. He's willing. It's not a weakness to change your mind. It's a strength. It's not a sign of failure to recognize that you had the wrong perception. It's a sign of strength and courage. And we need in our politicians and in our leaders people who are able to say, you know, I've got it wrong. This is now the way forward. So I wonder what we might be willing to change our mind about. Where God would say, I know you've held on to this dearly, but let me change it again. Look again at Scripture and see how things are different. And Jesus says, you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. This is John 1:50. You will see greater things than that. He then added, very truly, I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. What does he mean that Nathanael will see heaven open? Some people will say, well, it's a reference going back to this word play with Jacob and Israel to the opening of heaven that Israel has and Jacob has, and the battle and the wrestling with God in Genesis. Some people think that this is a literal experience that actually the gospel writers haven't recorded, but that Nathanael did see. Others think this is a way of Jesus describing his baptism, where the dove descends on Jesus, or maybe his transfiguration, or maybe the ascension of Jesus. And all of these things are possible and part. But I particularly like the understanding that says that Jesus is saying something metaphorical. He's saying, you believe. You believe because I told you. And because you believe, your faith will enable you to see more. And you will see heaven open. You will see the grace and glory and majesty and love of God come from heaven. That the barriers that you felt were between you and God are removed. And that through Jesus, as heaven is open, you will see in Jesus his glorification on the cross and in his resurrection, in his teaching and in his miracles. That you will see, as it were, angels coming and going through Jesus. You will see the power of God because heaven is opened by Jesus. I don't know. You choose your response and your thinking. What I do know is that Jesus has changed Nathanael and he's changed Philip. And so I want to remind us of those questions. Are we willing to be found and changed by Jesus? Are we willing to follow him to the places he is already in and where he calls us to come with him, even though they may be uncomfortable? And when we're in those places, are we willing to copy him, to act with grace and mercy and integrity and generosity and compassion and truthfulness? And when we're in those places, can we describe to others who Jesus is to us and what he has done and how he has brought peace or life or hope or cleansing or purpose or whatever it is? And what then are we suspicious of? Where then are our doubts? And where are we willing to have our mind changed? Have we eliminated deceit within us? Are we living in truth? Do we need to ask God to do that and cleanse that in us? And do we need to make steps to be more truthful? And finally, how does it change us to be known by Jesus? Let's pray together using some words from the great Psalm 139 that speaks of God knowing us. Lord, you've searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Father, thank you that you know me. It's too mind-blowing for me to understand, but I thank you that you do know me. Nothing is hidden from you, and I am safe in your knowledge. because your love cares for me. And even though you know me, you love me and have called me. And where can I go from your Spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me and your right hand will hold me fast. Lord, thank you that wherever I go in your name, or even if I'm running away from you, you will be with me and you will strengthen and hold me. And what you've called me to be and what you've called me to do and the places you've asking me to go, you are with me and you will hold me fast. Lord, hold me fast with your right hand. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. Lord, I thank you that you've made me, that I'm precious in your sight, that you've made me with all the different quirks that I am, but that you love and care for me. How precious to me are your thoughts. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Teach me and know test me and know my anxious thought. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. Lord, search me. Lord, you know my heart. Cleanse me. Remove the anxieties. Remove the dirt. Remove the things that are offensive. Remove the things that are not of you. Lord, make me pure, that I might live for you. Have we eliminated deceit within us? How does it change us to be known by Jesus? Are we willing to follow him? Amen.